Alright, so I've seen a few people talk about these two clones of Wonder Radios. These two clones that are the same thing, but have slight differences and also different model names. And because I own these two clones, and also from my experience of owning these two clones, and also seeing a few people ask the occasional question of what makes this radio different from this radio, I thought, why not make a video explaining all that? And as I'm here on this shelf with these two clones and also my middle one WR120 and WR400 aside, this video here is going to be talking on the differences of both the Midland WR30 and the Midland 74-10. And whether you came in this video wondering on what makes this radio different from this radio or the other way around, or if you randomly just came in this video wondering on what this is about, for whichever reason you came here, you're in for a video today. And in this video, I'm mostly going to be talking on the differences of both the WR30 and 74-10 and what makes them different, kind of. But also add in some additional information that goes into these two radios, such as the years in which both of them were released on. And since that's the first thing to talk here, let's get into that here. Alright, so the 74-10's first model year was 1999, at a time where same radios, same as in specific area message encoding, water radios, were becoming a new thing. And that these were the kind of radios that would allow a user to select a county or counties to go off for alerts. But yeah, the first model year for the 74-10 was 1999 when it was introduced by Midland. 2 years after that point though would be to 2001 when Midland would replace the 74-10 with the WR30 for 2001. And Midland had updated some of what the 74-10 had to the WR30. Some of which are the differences in which I'll be talking here going forward. But yeah, just put it simply, for the 74-10 being released in 1999 and the WR30 in 2001, this makes the 74-10 the original and the WR30 the updated and revised one. But yeah, that's one difference with the 74-10 and WR30. One of the couple that I'll talk in this video, in case you can't tell already by how long this video is. But yeah, another difference with both the 74-10 and WR30 is the way in which you access the menu. So let's get into that here and also into the menu as we head inside. Alright, so here we access the menu on these two radios via the program button on them. And the 74-10 and WR30 have their own separate ways in which you would access it via this button. So on the 74 to 10, you just simply press the program button, and here you are in the menu. Whereas on the WR30, you press and hold the program button for at least 2 seconds. And here you are in the menu. And in this menu, you have certain sections in which goes into these two radios in terms of user functionality, such as the alert modes for these being weather radios, siren levels, whether you want it to be low or high depending on your choosing, the channel frequencies for no weather radio, the clock setting, this section in which you would add in a county or counties in them for alerts. This section where you could have this radio or that radio activate for either one county or more than one county for alerts. Again, depending on your choosing. And this section. Now, this is a section where you would disable or enable the alert tone on watch and statement alerts. And I'll be getting into that section as I go forward with this video, but one difference to point out here, and I'm not even in the section yet, the fact that the WR30 refers to this section as being disable watch, whereas on the 74 to 10, it's disable warning. And I had already said that in this section you can only disable or enable the... This thing's just backed out. So did this. Alright, anyways, I had already said that in this section you can disable watches and statement alerts, but not for warnings though. Yet for whatever reason, Midland on the 74 to 10, for this being the original radio before the WR30 came out, Midland for some reason refers to this section as being disable warning, as if you can actually disable the alert tone for warnings, which you cannot do that if you even want to do that to begin with. But continuing on, in this section is where you get a selection of certain alerts that you can either enable or disable the alert tone for. And as I go forward with these alerts by pressing this, I'm going to be stating on what the alerts are, because Midland on the 74 to 10 and WR30 doesn't specify the alert themselves. Like, they don't specify if this is a flood statement or flood warning or flood watch. So, oh come on. So I'm just going to be doing that here if these radios don't back out for at least 5 minutes. But anyways, you have flood watch and statement, hurricane watch and statement, tsunami watch, avalanche watch, volcano watch, that's a thing, severe thunderstorm watch, flash flood watch and statement, winter storm watch, high wind watch, coastal flood watch for any of you viewers near a coastline, civil danger watch, and yes, you heard that right, civil danger watch, not civil danger warning. For some reason, for the 74 to 10 and WR30 being made during the late 1990s through very early 2000s. These two radios, along with a couple of others seen, were the radios during this time period had the codes for Civil Danger Watch, Radiological Hazard Watch, and Hazardous Materials Watch. And that's alongside the existing warning codes that they already have. Now, for the warnings, I get what they're there for. But for something like Hazardous Materials Watch or Civil Danger Watch, what are they really for? But yeah, the 74 to 10 and WR30, and also a few other radios during the late 1990s through early 2000s had the codes for had the codes for Civil Danger Watch, Radiological Hazard Watch, and Hazardous Materials Watch. But continuing on here, Severe Weather Statement, Special Weather Statement, Weekly tests on the WR30, but not on the 74 to 10. See what else is in here. Oh, monthly tests too. And that's a difference that the WR30 has that separates it from the 74 to 10 for the fact that in the disable warning / watch section on these radios, the WR30 has the weekly and monthly test codes in its section, whereas the 74 to 10 doesn't have it in there. In case this one backs out. But yeah, that's the difference with the 74 to 10 for something it doesn't have that the WR30 does. With the WR30 having the weekly and monthly tests in its disabled watch section, whereas the 74 to 10 in its disabled warning section, in which you can't even disable warnings on, doesn't have it. Now, this doesn't mean that the 74 to 10 can't go off for weekly and monthly tests. In fact, all of these radios I have here do, and if they didn't, I wouldn't be having them here. But it's just more so on the fact that in the disabled warning section, okay, I'll let you back out this time, the 74 to 10 doesn't have weekly and monthly tests in them, whereas the WR30 in its disabled watch section does have them. And again, the disabled warning / disabled watch section on the 74 to 10 and WR30 is the section in which you would disable or enable the alert tone on watch and statement alerts, or in the case of this radio, watch, statement, and test alerts. And since I just mentioned weekly and monthly tests, and also alert tones to go along with that, the WR30 has its own dedicated alert tone specific to weekly and monthly tests that the 74 to 10 doesn't have. The WR30 has its own dedicated alert tone for weekly and monthly tests that the 74 to 10 doesn't have. In fact, the 74 to 10 auto doesn't use any alert tone whatsoever for weekly and monthly tests. And before I continue talking about the alert tone for weekly and monthly tests on the WR30, we're going to go ahead and listen to the alert siren that both the 74-10 and WR30 use for warning, watch, and statement alerts. And if that alert siren sounds familiar to you, and maybe even too familiar to you, it's because that same alert siren is also used for recomms radios, and this on all 4 of their radios: the R1630, the R1650, which I have here, the R200, and R500. And again, for recomms radios, this would be for warning alerts for that siren. But yeah, for some reason, frankly, Recom had actually stolen the alert siren used for the 74-10 and WR30 from Midland and put it onto all of their radios. And sure enough, they got away with that. And I say it was stolen because I mentioned early on in this video that the 74-10 was first released in 1999 and the WR30 in 2001. Well, for Recom's radios, and also just Recom's presence of making water radios, they had made their radios years after Midland did for the 74-10 and WR30. And with that involved Recom stealing the siren which would be used for these 2 radios for what would be the warning siren on Recom's radios. And as I said, they pretty much got away with that. Bit of trivia there for you. But anyways, that's the alert siren that the 74-10 and WR30 use for warning, watch, and statement alerts. Now, for this alert tone, this is an alert tone that the WR30 uses for weekly and monthly tests. Something that the 74-10 doesn't have. And it's this. And yeah, that's the alert tone, or beep tone, I'd say, that the WR30 uses for weekly and monthly tests. And as I had said, this is specific to WR30, so the 74-10 won't have it. But yeah, that's a difference that's one of the differences that sets the WR30 apart from the 74-10. And I may also say that this is also a difference in which I've seen a few other people talk about as well. When talking about the WR30, for its beep tone that it uses for weekly and monthly tests. And the WR30 and also the 74-10, though I'm just going to be talking about the WR30 since it has its beep tone for weekly and monthly tests. The WR30, alongside weekly and monthly tests, also have 2 other test alerts, that being national periodic tests and also practice demo or practice demo warning. 2 other test alerts alongside weekly and monthly tests, but looking at the WR30's manual, they claim that the beep tone used for weekly and monthly tests is not used for national periodic tests and practice demo warning. In fact, that same manual also states that they don't use any sort of alert tone whatsoever. So, yeah, That beat tone is specific to weekly and monthly test awards on the WR30, and also specific to the WR30 and not the 74 to 10. And yeah, that's one difference with the 74 to 10 WR30. With what I had said there, about the tone for weekly and monthly tests. And as I continue on with the differences of these two radios, let's also get into something else that makes these two radios somewhat different. That being the test mode on them. Alright, so the 74 to 10 and WR30 have their own test mode, in which you can try and view a few stuff, let's say. Something you can also do with a couple of other water radios as well. But yeah, that's something that the 74 to 10 and WR30 have with their test mode. And in their test mode, I'm going to be getting into that on Byway Soccer Field. But to get into the test mode on the 74 to 10 and WR30, it's in the form of unplugging the radio and pressing and holding the stop button as you plug in the radio back in. So you have the 74 to 10 here, as you can see. And I'm going to be doing the WR30 next. Alright, I'm fully in the test mode on these two clones, I'd say. And as you can see, as I just got into the test mode on the 74 to 10 and WR30, they display two different things as you would first be in the test mode on these two radios. On the 74 to 10, as you're first in it, you get test mode, whereas on the WR30, you get EEPROM test OK on it. And in this mode, or in this test mode, if you will, you can play around with certain stuff in them, such as this, where you get an FM frequency on 106.0, 98.0. By the way, this is bleed through of WPEG 97.9. But yeah, that 90.0, and this is bleed through of WDAV 89.9.
No airport.
Channel
It
4.
was partly sunny. The temperature was 95 degrees.
The frequency of my local station, WXL70,
Producing a heat index of 100. The wind was variable at 3 miles an hour. The pressure was 29.93 inches and falling. At Gastonia, it was mostly sunny. The temperature was...
For this button, and also that, I'll get into that later on. But for the scroll wheel, you get nothing with it.
94 at Statesville and 98 at Fayetteville. It was partly sunny, with a temperature of 92
For this,
at
you
Shelby,
also get
92
nothing with
at
it.
Greensboro, 99 at Raleigh-Durham, and 86 at Asheville. At Wilmington, it was cloudy,
And
with a temperature of...
for the stop button, that would be the button in which you would activate the siren on these two radios. Okay, so seems as if my WR30 isn't doing it. Now, I'd like to point this out here. If you have a WR30, the siren will play when you press the stop button. Every WR30 can do that, just like how every 74-10 can do it. But it's just my WR30 model, my specific model that I have here, that doesn't do it for some reason. But yeah, just a note there. The WR30 will play the siren as you press the stop button, but it's just only my model that can't. But yeah, you have those, and as I press the lamp button, you get characters and also light indicators lit up, all three of them. And also up here for what could have been a potential temperature sensor, which never came in. They don't have one. Would be nice if they did have a temperature sensor, but they don't have one. But anyway, you have that. And as I press the lamp button again, after you saw what you just saw, you get this. You get test mode on the 74-10 and test mode on the WR30. But the way that they refer to test mode on this is different. Because on the WR30, they have test mode as in 2 words, whereas on the 74-10, it's just 1 word. And yeah, that's another difference alongside the other differences of which I've already talked about in this video that the 74-10 and WR30 have. And with me being done with using the test mode on these 2 radios, I'm going to plug them back in. And here I am back in normal mode now, where I was just at. Alright, I'm going to be talking about 3 other differences. Wait, hang on, not 3, but 4 other differences. It was 3 back when I filmed this video clip here, but as of editing, it's an additional one. For the 74-10 and WR30. Now, this difference here is going to be specific to the 74-10, but it's on the fact that it has a flaw to it. Something that the WR30 had fixed, but something that the 74-10 has a flaw of. That being a flaw involving its clock. Alright, so this is a flaw with the 74-10 involving its clock, as I had said. And this is a flaw that Midland had fixed with the WR30, but on the 74-10, it's a flaw on it. The flaw itself basically involves the 74-10's clock freezing after a certain period of time of it being set. So like, let's say, hypothetically speaking, if I had set the 74-10 and WR30 to something like 1:15 p.m. it'll be an hour past that, and while the WR30 would say the correct time to 21 p.m., the 74 to 10 would be behind and say something like 1:31 p.m. or 1:49 p.m. or 2:04 p.m. or some other kind of time that would be behind the correct time that the WR30 would be displaying otherwise. And yeah, just simply put here, the 74 to 10 has a flaw where its clock would freeze or be behind after a certain period of time of its clock being set to. And this isn't a huge flaw, at least not compared to, let's say, if the 74 to 10 were to not activate for any alerts, which for weather radio would be bad. But I would more so just consider this minor flaw to, at best, just be something to look out for, or something to be aware of when owning a 74 to 10 like this one. But yeah, that's one difference with the 74 to 10 and WR30. A flaw that the 74 to 10, well, albeit a minor flaw, that the 74 to 10 has, that Midland would later fix with the WR30. And as I continue on with the differences here, as I have been, would be something else too that makes the 74 to 10 and WR30 different. Though this is really more of an even minor thing to talk about, because this is more of an internal thing with these two radios, that being the same as in specific area messaging coding versions on these two radios. And again, that's a minor thing to talk about since it's just an internal thing, but for the sake of me talking about the differences for these two clones, I'll put it in here. Alright, so for both the Midland 74 to 10 and WR30 being same radios, and for them having same technology, they also have their own separate versions to themselves for same capability on these two radios. So the 74 to 10's same version, which Midland would put on the boxes of the 74 to 10 and WR30, they claim that the 74 to 10's same version is version V.12, whereas on a WR30, its same version is version V.13. But I mean, for this being just only an internal thing, I don't know what person owning one of these two radios, or if you're like me, both of these radios, is going to care about such a small thing like that whatsoever. I just don't see it. But I mean, for this video being where I talk about all the differences that these two clones have, thought I'd put it in anyway, even for it being such a small thing. And here's another minor difference to point out with the 74 to 10 in WR30. So this difference here, out of all the other differences I've mentioned here in this video, this here involves what is listed on the bottom of these two radios. So going to flip the 74 to 10 backwards. Not that my 74 to 10 doesn't have a battery covered. And my WR30 backwards. Just like so. And this difference here involves what's listed on here. Though it's two separate differences. One of them being how on the 74 to 10, it's listed as model number 74 to 10. Whereas on the WR30, it's listed as model number WR30. That's one of the two differences of that. The other is what these radios list as being Midwind's headquarters during the time that these two radios were made. And here you see that they list two different addresses to Midwind's headquarters. So on the 74 to 10, you have what is listed as custom manufactured in China for Midwind Consumer Radio, 1670 North Topping, Kansas City, Missouri, 64120. And on the WR30, you have what's listed as custom manufactured in China for Midwind Consumer Radio, 1120 Clay Street, North Kansas City, Missouri, 64116. So, I suppose that around the time that Midwind had been making these two radios, that they had switched their headquarters. He headquarters to this brand here. And this isn't, despite the WR30 being the updated version to the 74 to 10, this isn't Midwind's current headquarters. They've instead moved into, well, some other part of Kansas City, I'm pretty sure. Since Midwind as a company resides in Kansas City, Missouri, and pretty much has been for most of their existence. But yeah, in other words, you have a difference on the bottom of these two radios, both the model numbers and also the addresses to Midwind's headquarters at the time of them making both the 74 to 10 and WR30. Now, as I said, this is a minor difference, a very minor difference that I don't blame you if you haven't known of this before. In fact, I'm just recently knowing about this. But as I've said, for the sake of me talking on almost every difference with the 74 to 10 and WR30, since they're clones to each other, I thought it'd be worth it to point this out anyway. And also, as I continue on with my differences, there's going to be yet another one, albeit a last difference to the 74 to 10 and WR30. Though this difference here doesn't have anything to do with the radios themselves, as far as how they're made of is concerned with. But let's get into that here. And now here's the last difference with both the 74 to 10 and WR30. Now, this difference in particular, it isn't really a difference with what these radios have, but it's instead on how often they're seen on e-commerce or selling websites like eBay, for example, or Mercari or OfferUp or what have you. And also, this ties into what I just said about those selling websites, on how often water radio enthusiasts, such as myself, see these radios on said websites. So, you'll see a couple amount of 74 to 10s on a site like eBay, for example. Whereas for the WR30, most times there's none, and that if there is one, it'll just only be that one WR30 on that website, and then it'll just get sold quickly. And that's because, to water radio enthusiasts, you may even be one watching this video, the WR30 is seen by them as being a rare radio, if you're into that sort of thing, compared to the 74-10 being a common radio. Again, to the perspective of a water radio enthusiast like myself. And I kind of I speculate that the WR30 may be rare. Again, if you're into that sort of thing, possibly because of the low number that it was sold at during its years of 2001 through 2002, especially as there were two other water radios that Midland would be introducing during that time. May have probably ate into the WR30 sales. But yeah, the difference with that is that it gives the WR30 its own rarity. Well, to the perspective of a water radio enthusiast like myself, whereas the 74-10 would be the more common one. And while I didn't get my WR30 here because of its rarity, and instead just got it for what it is, I have seen a couple of water radio enthusiasts talk about the WR30's supposed rarity. Though if you're not really a water radio enthusiast, or at least not to a level in which you consider this radio rare, just simply put, there isn't too many WR30s around compared to the 74-10, simply put. But yeah, that's a difference there. And also the last difference in this video. And since that just about does it for all the differences that I mentioned, I may also get into talk about my own experience with owning my 74-10 and WR30. And before we get into this section here, if I mention any specific stuff for my 74-10 and WR30, just note that those things that will be mentioned in this section don't apply to every 74-10 and WR30, and that it's just only my two models based from my own experience. But with all that said, let's just go to the transition effect for this video. Alright, so I got this 74-10 as my very first water radio in April of 2020, though I would actually be using it 3 months after that to July of that year, since I didn't have an adapter until July. And between July 2020 to February of 2021 was during the time that I would be using my 74-10. In other words, that was at least 6 or 7 months that I would be using my 74-10 within that time period. And by February of 2021, when I would eventually stop using my 74-10, was when I got my WR30 that year. And since February of 2021, for 3 years since that point, I've been using my WR30, and even to current day, to 2024, so that's 3 years between the time I got my WR30 to the year I'm recording this video, for how long I've been owning my WR30 for. And the reason I switched from my 74-10 to my WR30 goes along with some issues and glitches that my 74 to 10, this specific model, has had for the time I've owned it. And I will note this here, not all 74 to 10s have the issues that I will mention in mine. But I will say that just these issues on my model of my 74 to 10 are why I switched from this to my WR30. So I'll start off here with its speaker. Oh, oops. That being the 74 to 10 slow speaker, which, I mean, oh, and it's also on high volume, by the way. I mean, you can hear it, but for it being a low speaker at low volume, even with me having the volume slider at high, you would have to be at a nearby spot to hear the 74 to 10, or hear the speaker of this 74 to 10. Whereas for my WR30, in terms of its speaker,
heat advisory remains in effect until 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time this evening.
is normal.
Values up to 105 expected. Where? In Georgia, Elbert County. In North Carolina, Cabarrus, Mecklenburg, and Union, North Carolina.
That's me with Mecklenburg.
South Carolina, Abbeville.
But yeah, the low speaker on my 74 to 10 is part of why I switched from this to my WR30. But I did say that it was part of why. Another reason why is due to a glitch with the 74 to 10's scroll wheel. Specifically with how I will go either forward or backward with certain sections within this menu. But this 74 to 10 will repeat those sections. Oh, and would you look at that, it just went backward. Oh, now it just freeze. Oh, just went backward and backward again. Trying to see if it'll repeat. Oh, just glitched there. Oh, now it just glitched again. With its scroll wheel. But yeah, you get the idea. The glitch on my 74 to 10 scroll wheel is one of the issues that I have with this model. The one I have here. To be specific. Another thing is also how my 74 to 10 speaker was with its pitch. And if I didn't explain that enough, hopefully these two videos will. Yeah, it's that bad. Yeah, that's how my 74 to 10 was with its speaker. Not only with its speaker being low, even at a high volume, but it also having weird pitches at times, like strange random pitches with its speaker. if I were to be using either the button beeps or the siren. And this last issue here, or I suppose a glitch, I'd say. This isn't why I'd switch from my 74 to 10 to my WR30, but I thought it'd be best to point this out, given that this is a part of this video where I talk about my experience with owning these two. So, believe it or not, there's actually one time where my 74 to 10 actually had a firmware glitch where as I was in here, the 74 to 10, well, this 74 to 10 did a glitch with its firmware to where, oh, and don't tell Middle about this, by the way, that it displayed frequencies that, well, nobody's ever known of before.
Channel 0? Take a look at this when I scroll the wheel backwards on my 74 to 10. Want to do the same thing again. And again. Wow. Has my 74 to 10 discovered new frequencies? Something that all of these radios can't do?
Yeah, so that firmware glitch with my 74 to 10 at one time was displaying frequencies like channel 0 and some other stuff. And that adds on to the couple of other glitches that I've already mentioned regarding my 74 to 10. Now, for the firmware glitch with its frequencies, that didn't get me a switch. I had discovered that already after I'd been using my WR30, so that firmware glitch with the channel 0 and stuff, that didn't get me a switch from my 74 to 10 to WR30. What did get me the switch was the low speaker that I had, along with its scroll dial glitching if I were to move it. In addition to also its time freezing glitch that the 74 to 10 has. Those are what got me to switch from my 74 to 10 to WR30. And well, I already have the WR30 here, and have been for over 3 years at this point. But yeah, and just repeating this again, for any issues and glitches that I've mentioned for my 74 to 10, do note that this is not on every 74 to 10, it's just, for what I know, it's just mine that it does.
And I said multiple times in this video that not every issue of my 74 to 10 applies to every other one. And I say that because, let's say you're watching this video right now and you do want a 74 to 10, and trust me, I sure did in 2020 when I was starting out in water radios, then you can go ahead and get one for yourself if you'd like, or a WR30 even, if you see one. But just the stuff that I mentioned on my 74 to 10 is just any experience that I've had with my model from my experience. So I sure hope that whatever 74 to 10 model you have, even if it may have that time freezing lag, I hope that it isn't as bad and as hellish as my model is, because I consider my 74 to 10 model to really just be on life support, if anything.
But yeah, that just about does it for this video. For me uncovering the differences of both the Midland 74 to 10 and WR30, adding in some background information regarding the two radios, and also discussing about my own experiences with owning the two radios. Though I suppose the experience part was more so leaning on the 74 to 10 with what I had said. But yeah, and with all these stuff that I had said regarding the 74 to 10 and WR30 in terms of any information and differences I've said on them, if you had popped in this video wondering what is the difference between the 74 to 10 and WR30, or what is the difference between the WR30 and 74 to 10, hopefully this video answered your questions on that. Because I myself, I was shaking my phone because prior to me just recording all this, or prior to me just recording this video, if there is somebody that asks what is the difference between a WR30 and 74 to 10, I would actually have to tell them what it is and list all these stuff for them, and I don't want to do that every time. So I have this video to uncover all that, and I don't know how long this video is going to be by the time it's been uploaded and edited, but for all that I talked about by now for these past couple of minutes, it's definitely going to be a lengthy one. But yeah, that just about does it for this video for both these two clones, the Midland 74 to 10 and the Midland WR30. Well, take care, have a good one, and also good conversation.